And so when we're having a garden, we are trying to, yes, grow, but we're also protecting and conserving the abundance that we have walled off within those spaces.
Welcome to Soror Mystica, a podcast exploring life's mysteries and magic through its symbols.
I'm Mariana Lewis, an archetypal tarotist.
And I'm astrologer Christina Farella.
And just as the Soror Mystica guided the alchemist through his holy work, we hope to be your mystic sisters in these conversations, guiding you deeper into the symbolic life. Hey everyone, welcome to the 35th episode of Soror Mystica. Our focus today is on the symbol of the garden, and we are in full spring vibes. I think it's May now that this is coming out. It's still April for us when we're recording it, but May is a great month and very gardeny and springy. And we're going to talk about some beautiful things today. So why don't we just jump into what we're reading? What are you reading, Christina?
Right now, I am making my way through When God Was a Woman, because that's our book club book. And it is really wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm grateful that that is our pick. And lately I've been reading the poetry of Pablo Neruda, who is like a favorite. Mm-hmm.
I want to sit down with a book of his poems so badly, and I just have never done it, but I need to. I need to.
I can make some recommendations. I just have like a big collected from the library, but
that's
so romantic and so like just like pure lyricism. And
I know.
Just love him so much. So
I'm all about it.
Mm-hmm.
I am currently, while you are listening to this, I am on vacation. I will be on vacation very shortly. So I'm not reading anything currently that's new, but I want to pick up some of the books that I haven't finished that have been on my list for a while. So I'm working my way through a book on the Cathars.
Mm-hmm.
I've picked that up again I got about halfway through and then I kind of put it down. And we're also going to be, I'm also kind of making my way through When God Was a Woman again too. So I don't have a lot of new things. I want to like get into some like witchcraft books. I haven't like read a good book on witchcraft in a while. So if anyone has like recommendations that they want to share with me on witchcraft books that are not fluffy, that are like smart books, but also not just like about how witches have been murdered for thousands of years. So I don't want that either. I mean, that's good, but I want books on like real witchcraft. So love recommendations for that. So that's it. Light on the books, but please join our book club for sure. I am very excited about When God Was a Woman to discuss this because, as I said in our last episode, this book changed my life 100%. It's basically what When God Was a Woman is, a book about the ancient mother goddess cultures. And it's one of the first books ever to come out about this topic. It was written in the 70s, I think, 70s. And it's just going to open your brain in ways that you didn't even know to think about the world. And what's really good about it too is that we see a lot of content out there about like mother goddess cultures and matriarchy and all these things. But no one reads these books about it. So it's like, this is the book to read. Another one to read if you haven't read before is The Chalice and the Blade by Rianne Eisler. And that one's really good too. But I prefer When God Was a Woman because it's more based in like the stuff that they found and the artifacts they found and the ways that they have to prove it. Whereas The Chalice and the Blade is a little bit more of like a big theory of like the way life used to be. So I prefer this one. And I really hope to see some people there, new faces that haven't been in our book club before. I'm just extremely eager to discuss this with people. So come and talk about it with me.
We shall.
It's gonna be great. All right. So let's talk about gardens. Do you have garden reflections for us to start off with?
Yeah. So, like Mariana was saying, it's just kind of a good time of year to tune in with the garden image, the garden symbol. And gardens are just one of those things that show up in every religion, every mythology, every culture, because it has something to do with like fertility and
Yeah.
protecting something that is fertile. And so, interestingly, I've got a definition from my symbols book, and then I want to talk about the etymology of the word paradise. So, for garden, it says paradise, the fields of the blessed, the abode of souls. The gardener is the creator and the center, and in the center of the garden grows the life-giving tree, fruit, or flower, the reward of him who finds the center. The garden is also the symbol of the soul and the qualities cultivated in it, and of tamed and ordered nature. Enclosed gardens are the feminine protective principle. They also represent virginity. In Christian orientation, the enclosed garden is a symbol of the Virgin Mary. For Hermetics, the garden is the good gardener of life who brings to fruit the blossom of new life, also associated with the Logos, which is interesting.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so I think that overall, we're going to talk about these different enclosed gardens. For the Romans, there were funerary gardens that were considered to be a counterpart of like Elysium, where heroes would go in the afterlife. And so that's all really interesting to me because we have the kind of the co-presence of like virginity and fertility, which is very much like a Virgin Mary kind of thing once we start really pulling that apart. But in my research for this episode, I learned that, a lot of the gardens that we have in mythology and in the Bible, like the Garden of Eden, or even like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, they have this paradise sort of
Yeah.
vibe to them. And
Yeah.
so I learned that the word paradise, its etymology actually comes from a kind of like old Iranian sort of root. And it literally, paradise means a walled, enclosed space.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to think about paradise because when we think about paradise, I think about like freedom and I think about possibility and I think about having everything that you need. But there's this idea built into the word of having it have to be enclosed or cloistered or even just like protected and walled off. So I think in medieval art and literature there are many walled gardens, and it's
Yep.
a very romantic symbol that we'll kind of work our way through. But just to get started today, the co-presence or the counterbalancing of fertility, virginity, something that's protected and pure, and also bursting with life, and secret, enclosed, and occulted
Yeah.
is also very interesting to me. So I'm excited for garden episode. Here we are.
I think it's great. This was a great suggestion. And I think that I like this kind of layer that you're pulling out of virginity versus fertility. We see the fertility in the garden simply because of how lush and fruitful it is. And then the virginity aspect, I think a lot of people get caught up on the word virginity. When we think about it archetypally, it really has nothing to do with sex. It's about the sovereignty, self-sovereignty that we think about when we're talking about virginity. So virginity, a virgin is somebody who is not married, not coupled, not bound to something else. So it is allowed to explore its selfhood. And so whenever we're talking about the soul, a lot of times the soul as a symbol will come up as some kind of a virgin thing, oftentimes as a virgin woman, because we see this as pure, but also self-sovereign. She is not engaged with somebody else, and etc. So I think that that's a beautiful way of thinking about the garden. And I really want to. I think starting with the idea of paradise is important because when we think about the gardens that we know, the most famous garden is probably the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden is paradise. It actually is paradise. I always kind of thought it was weird that we had the Garden of Eden and then it just like disappeared, but like heaven is different. But the Garden of Eden is like heaven on earth. And as a kid, that was always like, what? It's like, who made up this story? You've got some plot holes.
It's one of those where you're like, actually, we could have edited this a little bit.
But the Garden of Eden is paradise on earth, and it's the garden is often this image that we hold of the idyllic world, the idealistic world, the utopian world. In which there is, when we think of a garden, we don't think of rain, we don't think of snow, we don't think of anything that touches it, but sun, gentle, warm weather, maybe there's a cloud once, but like that's about it. Otherwise, it's perfect. And the perfection of it, the experience of paradise that the garden conveys, I think is really important to understanding the symbol. And there's a beauty in it, but there's also an untouchability in it. I like the word used, like there's something occulted about it. I think of The Secret Garden
I was
too.
just going to say that.
Yeah.
That's so funny. I was obsessed with that
I
when
was
I was
going
a
to say,
kid.
were you obsessed? Because
Oh,
if you
yeah.
said no, then I'd have a problem with you and we couldn't be friends anymore. I
Great.
was, I was completely obsessed. How
Yeah.
could you
No.
not be?
No, of
I
course. Of
loved that
course.
movie. I loved that movie so much.
It was very powerful. I read the book too, I think, whatever like the kids' version of the book
Yeah, I
was.
don't think I ever actually
I
did.
really liked that there was like a bird that she followed to
Mm-hmm.
find the door. I was like so obsessed with that. And I always thought that birds were like beckoning to me when I was a
Mm-hmm.
kid because I'm, naturally insane. So there's something, but there's something too powerful about the idea of being led into a secret place where nature is kind of like speaking to you and is
Yeah.
in relationship with you. And it's something that we have lost touch with, I think, at this point in time. We live either in really citified environments or suburban environments for the most part. And everything's kind of like tamped down and,
Yeah.
spiritualized.
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about the way that a garden allows us to connect with God, like if the Garden of Eden is a gift from God himself for Adam and Eve to live in and experience life in, there's something extremely, just divine and
Mm-hmm.
perfect about that offering. So yeah, I'm an earth sign, but I'm like a really bad gardener. And I think it's because I've never tried to do it with like awareness. I've always just been like, I'm planting 9 different things right now, and they're all gonna not grow at all. And so
Your Gemini side interrupts your Virgo side.
it really is annoying. And I think that I need to be fixed because there's something about me that's like can be really focused and then I just get totally off centered immediately. But anyway, yeah, the Gemini takes me away. But gardening is also about labor. And so I think that when I think about the Garden of Eden, I think about Adam and Eve having that experience of like eating from the tree of knowledge and then
Yeah.
being expelled into labor. And so there's something about like that's the next step on the path after you can no longer access the Edenic space of God. And
Yeah.
there's something interesting about labor and gardening that kind of goes
Mm-hmm.
hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah, there is no labor in the Garden of Eden. Like everything is just fruitful of its own nature. I think that's something interesting that we can think about with that myth of the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve are given the garden as a gift to say like this is what, because God loves you so much, God gives you this idyllic paradise. And the only expectation is that you don't want more than
Yeah.
paradise. And of course, Eve is tempted by the serpent. We've yet to have a serpent episode, which is still nuts that we haven't had that yet.
We
We
did
will.
Ouroboros, but
We did the
yeah.
Ouroboros, so we talked about it a little bit. But we know that the snake is connected very much to the feminine traditionally, and specifically like mystery experiences with the feminine. And so we know that there's this like layer of shadow that comes in, but also there's like the rejection of the feminine maybe in that story too. And there's these interesting layers that we can explore, which is not really what this episode's about. But the serpent tempts Eve, but it doesn't really tempt her. I mean, if you really read it, it's just like, don't you want more? And Eve takes a second to think about it and she goes, yeah, I think I do actually. I think like knowledge would be good and selfhood would be good.
How dare she?
Yeah, exactly. How dare she? And it is the thing is that what's interesting about that story and that myth is that in paradise there is no need for selfhood. There is no need to individuate. There is no need to find soul because you are in the full experience of heaven, which is just the divine soul all around you. But by biting into the apple, by biting into the fruit of the knowledge, that's an important word, the knowledge of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil is representative of the ability to discern what is our personal experience of life, and
Mhm.
it's not really about morality. It's really about I guess logos, right? That ability to understand and to be conscious. It's the choice to be conscious, and that's what she chooses. She chooses to be conscious of herself and to be conscious
Mhm.
of the world, and that is the ultimate sin, because to be conscious as a human means to also be conscious, that there is a humanity and there is a godhood, and these two things are different. And so then we
Mhm.
are instantly separated from the natural state of divinity. And so we were expelled from the garden, and something, or Eve was, and something that was interesting, I think, that Joseph Campbell says about this myth is that they're expelled from the like primordial state of being at one with nature.
Mhm.
Consciousness also puts us at odds with nature because it
Mhm.
makes us separate from it, because we are self-conscious means that we are
Mhm.
not just like subsumed by our natural essence of just
Mhm.
being. And I think that that's a really interesting thing that the garden can represent to that presence with nature, being at
Yeah,
one with nature.
as you're talking, it kind of makes me think about like just birth. Like
Yeah.
in utero, we're
Yeah.
in this state where
Exactly.
we have our needs met automatically by the body of the mother. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, birth is this separation, and we're not individuated when we're born. That's when we
No.
really start
Hmm.
the process of individuation. But that kind of being expelled from the Edenic paradise
Hmm.
state
Hmm.
of the uterus is really, really
Hmm.
traumatic. And it's a trauma as well for Adam and Eve, who go off to like wander and labor and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really interesting. Hmm.
I think that idea of labor, right? The garden presenting everything you ever need. And then when they leave, they have to labor for it. They can't just, they have to work for it. It's very symbolic of that work of individuating. We have to labor to become,
Yeah.
our experience of ourselves.
Yeah. In and that's like so much of the work that we do. So I think that, it's really great to pull this symbol apart and really sit with what that means, that individuation thing. In
Hmm.
another version of a kind of Edenic garden, we've got, obviously in the Bible, we've got Eden, which was like created eastward. That's what it's said, right,
Hmm.
in the text. But in the Greek myths, we have the Garden of the Hesperides, which is a Venusian garden, which is built far to the western edge of the world.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's like this um, kind of like etymological chain of like Hesperides, which links to Vesper, which links to Venus, which links to West. And it's a garden that is guarded by the nymphs of evening and the nymphs of
Mm.
night. That's what the Hesperides are.
Hence
And so
our evening
there's
vespers.
exactly, exactly.
Hmm.
And so, there are three of them, like the three graces or the three fates, and their job is to guard the golden apples of Hera. And those apples were given to them by Gaia, or given to Zeus and Hera as a wedding present. And they're just supposed to be the best apples ever. And so we have, again, like the symbolism of the tree in the
Hmm.
center of the garden. And that's like a really interesting echo to me.
Hmm.
That tree was also guarded by a dragon, a hundred-headed dragon. So we've got the serpent and the dragon between these two gardens,
Hmm.
because Hera didn't believe that the nymphs wouldn't eat the fruit. So these like younger feminine figures are supposed to like be there, protect the tree, not, take of it. And this is also the same tree where Eris took the apple of discord in the
Hmm.
myths to like create mass confusion and another story. And Heracles also has to steal the apples from this tree as one of his labors. So,
Yeah, Atalanta is also
yep,
she loses her race because she's distracted by the
it's
golden apples.
it's Eris who throws
Oh yes,
the,
yeah, uh-huh. That's right.
and then
Yeah.
she has to get married. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, that's another sort of like, Atalanta having to remove herself from this sort of virginal state and go
Hmm.
into marriage. I don't know if she's that upset about it, but she just, yeah.
Well, it's kind of sad because she's the fastest person on earth, and there is a man who's like, "I can beat you. I'm a
If I
man."
cheat,
And he
yeah,
cheats, and then she has to marry him, and that just feels like a story of womanhood. I don't know.
that's very true. But I do think that in the stories, she was feeling bad because all of the youths that would try to beat her would be killed because they would all
Yes.
lose. So she knew that a lot of people were dying too.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, but anyway, yeah. So there's just like I just wanted to highlight the continued symbolism of like the feminine, the tree, the serpent, the dragon, and the apple as
Yeah.
kind of like concurrent, whether you're looking at a pagan garden or the
Mm-hmm.
Christian garden. So
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah.
curious little links there.
And it's beautiful. I think something that we can pull out from that is that there's always something at the center of the garden. This
Mm-hmm.
is like always like a thing that we find over and over again. So the garden itself, like in your symbols book, it says the garden is a symbol of soul. I feel more appropriately, it's like the boundary around it. It's like
Mm.
the space, the womb space around the fetus or the thing at the center. There's always a tree at the center, or a plant at the center, or sometimes there's a well at the center. Like there's something at the center.
Mm-hmm.
In the chalice, at the chalice well in Glastonbury in England. I had the great privilege of going there a few years ago. I want to take you.
I want to
One
go.
day, we just need to run away together. Let me take you places. I just want to take you places. I want you to take me places. Take me to Italy.
I
Um,
will.
so in the chalice well, the myth that goes along with that is that the water there is red. It's not actually red. It has a very faint red tint, and it's because there's extremely high levels of iron in the water. And the myth goes that very, very long time ago, this was the well of the goddess, feminine being connected with blood and
Mm-hmm.
etc. And then in the Judeo-Christian kind of usurpation of the legend, that was the well from which Arthur, the Grail was planted there, and Arthur had to like find it, and the Grail had the blood of Christ in it, and so the water was red, and blah blah blah, a
Mm.
lot of stuff.
It's still a
But
pretty story. Yeah.
it's a very pretty story. And so I got to visit that well in Glastonbury, and it's basically just a hole in the ground with a nice cover, whatever. But what they did is that they built this extraordinary garden around it. And it
Mm.
is so beautiful. And I was not expecting a garden. I was expecting a well, and it would just be a nice well, and they'd sell me a tourist thing, a keychain, a bottle of water, and I'd be on my way. But there's just beautiful trees around it, and roses and flowers, and it's a stunning garden. And it was very perfect, and that they put this well right at the center of it. It felt very magical and mythical that we're like
Mm.
entering this enclosed, and the garden has like a little gate that you have
Mm.
to go through, and that's the only entrance, and it looks like nothing, and then you walk in and it's this beautiful thing, and
That's great.
it's very special. And I think that, thinking of this, there's always something at the center of the garden, and there's always like this essential soul experience. And I want to bring up the medieval poem of the Roman de la Rose. And it's a weird thing. The Roman de la Rose is basically the story of the rose, and it's a very weird tale of somebody who basically falls in love with a rose, and is like, or enters this garden, and there's all these allegorical figures that it encounters, and it's very traditional medieval kind of thing where it's like bumps up against pride and love and lust or whatever, I don't know, the different personified virtues and vices and stuff. But at the center of the garden is this rose that's just kind of blooming there, and the singular rose, and it's so beautiful and so magnificent that the speaker can't control himself, and like I feel like he even like makes out with it or something. Do you
There's
remember?
something happens between them. Yeah.
We read it
There's some
together in grad school.
inappropriate exchange. Yeah.
I remember reading it and being like so mystified, like this is so pretty, and then I got to that part and I was like, wait, no. um, but it was interesting because I remember discussing it in our whatever class we were in, that we're reading it, and thinking like the professor was talking about how, like, does the rose represent like the author's beloved, right? That he's personified as this rose. And I was like, yeah, I mean, probably consciously he might have been thinking of it that way if he wrote it like that, but it's the soul. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the possession of the soul. We don't have such a beautiful image of the garden itself and all these different characters and all these different human experiences populating the garden and all these beauties of the garden, and then get to such a central image as the rose at the
Mhm.
center of it and not connect it to the experience of soul, which is always presented as beauty.
Mhm.
And we talked about this also, I think, in our rose episode. So if you
Mhm.
haven't listened to our rose episode, it's one of my favorites. You can go
Yep.
listen to that for sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think that, again, that feels very much like as the rose is like the symbol of the Virgin Mary,
Yeah,
as well.
exactly.
Feels very much like that sort of the beauty, like of the idealized soul that is both fertile and also protected. And I love the idea of something like, a great garden that holds a lot of beauty needing to be protected. I think that sometimes in life we have these experiences where we're searching for something really great and really powerful, and we do it without like any kind of grounding or framework or guardrails, if that makes sense. And
Hmm.
so we wind up like either overdoing it, or we get frustrated, or we get overextended by the search for the soul or the search for
Yeah.
great mystery. And that's why I think it's important to have frameworks like, whatever you want it to be. It can be Hermeticism, it can be astrology,
Hmm.
it can be tarot, it can be literally whatever. And I think that that's what leads us towards something that is more fruit bearing along the way. It's like we need the enclosure of the
Yeah.
garden to be there with us.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
think that's a really beautiful metaphor. So our practice or our modality is the garden itself
Yeah.
that surrounds the precious thing at the center.
Hmm.
I think that's
I
really
also
pretty.
just want to say I have my pack of tarot cards in front of me, and I just like idly flipped one over because I was just feeling like it, and I pulled the lovers.
Wow.
And I almost
Wow.
screamed.
Oh, screamed.
For those of you who aren't tarot people, it shows
It's the
Adam and
Garden of
Eve in
Eden.
the garden. So we have the approval of someone for this episode, and that's
Someone
also
is
really weird.
listening. Whatever
Weird
deity is
synchronicity.
listening, thank you very much for tuning in. And
Please rate and review us, and just kidding. Oh God.
that's
But yeah.
great. Well, speaking of the tarot, we have a couple cards that point us towards the garden that we can pull out. One of them is the Lover's card for sure. It doesn't show us the like beauty, abundant beauty of the garden
Right.
as much as it focuses on Adam and Eve and the two
Mhm.
trees.
Mhm.
And for people who aren't totally aware of this, there are two trees in the garden. I think a lot of people don't actually realize that there are
Yeah.
two trees in the garden.
Yeah.
There's the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then there's the tree of life. And these are
Mhm.
separate trees. And so we see that on the tarot, where one is in front of one and one is in front of the other. I
Mhm.
think that Eve is in front of the tree of knowledge of good and evil,
Yep.
and then he's in front of the tree of life
Yep.
because it
She's got
has
the
the
snake
fire.
behind her.
Hmm.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So there's that. And then there's also two other cards in the tarot that really point to garden imagery. Pentacles in general will point to garden
Mhm.
stuff and life and fruitfulness because the pentacles are about materiality, substantiality. So they show us these metaphors of growth and development and nourishment. But we see in the Nine of Pentacles, we see the garden where the woman is literally in front of her garden that she's
Mhm.
cultivated. And in that case, the garden feels more like the fruit of our efforts, the fruit of our labors,
Mhm.
that we can kind of look at the paradise we've created for ourselves. And then in the one that's a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit grander, I guess, is the Ace of Pentacles also shows us the garden. And in particular, something that is worth noticing in the Ace of Pentacles is that there is a gate and that we see the garden kind of through the gate. And I think there's this idea of the walled experience that we've kind of pointed at a little bit with our symbolism of the garden, that there has to be a wall, it has to be enclosed, it's not just open, otherwise it's wild, otherwise it's part of forest and nature, which is a different symbol.
Mhm.
It's really not the same exact thing. The garden has to be separate and it has to be walled off, it has to be
Mhm. Has to be
protected from,
cultivated. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it has to be protected from like mortal life. This is supernatural when we enter the garden. And so with the Ace of Pentacles, we see, whenever I see aces come up, I always say this is a gift, and it is not something we did ourselves. It is not something we've worked for ourselves. It's not something that we've brought upon ourselves. It is a gift. That doesn't mean that we haven't earned it, and it doesn't mean that we haven't prepared ourselves to work with it. But I really like to think of the aces being a little bit of like the universe has offered you something, take it. And so I think that can be when we're thinking about the symbol of the garden. If you dream about gardens or you encounter gardens in some way, Ace of Pentacles is a great card to work with, for sure. I really like to think. I actually did a reading for somebody recently, and they were like trying to have me understand what they were experiencing and really struggling to say it clearly. And they just kept falling into garden metaphors and analogies. And then in the beginning, like before we started pulling cards, and then like one of the first cards I pulled was the Ace of Pentacles, and I was like, that is what you're experiencing. There is a garden here, and you feel the symbol very potently, and you don't necessarily know how to translate that into like a realistic experience you're having. But that's the symbol. Let's just stick with the symbolic language for it, because it's still communicating what you mean, even if you can't consciously like make language around it yet.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I love that. And I love that synchronicity. I think that one of the things that I heard about the Ace of Pentacles a long time ago is that, that gateway is showing you what's available once you walk out of the gate or like into the garden space.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is available to you, and you need to know that you have the ability to walk towards that abundance or walk towards that new thing. So I think that that's very, very important.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think with the aces in general, like it's a hand that offers it to you, and that's not an accident. The hand represents a divine force, an external force, an angel, a god or something giving it to you. And then the next step is to take it. Like that's the thing not shown in the card, is our hand reaching out to take it from the hand.
That's so smart.
So it's like when we have the Ace of Cups presented, we receive the Holy Grail, or we receive the Sword of Discernment, or receive the Wand of Inspiration, and we receive the seed of the Pentacle to go plant, and we have to go off and plant it now.
That's great. I love that so much. So I think that all of these images just keep circling around this idea of like potential, and we're in this astrological time of year where the sun is in the sign Taurus. We've just had the conjunction at the time that you're listening to this. We haven't experienced it yet, but we've just had the conjunction.
Stay tuned. Did we make
Jupiter
it?
and Uranus. We'll see if we come back for episode 36. But so we've had the conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus at about 21 degrees Taurus. And I think that I wanted to tune in a little bit with the idea of Taurus, just briefly, because of just the time of year that we're in. So Taurus is a fixed sign. It is an earth sign, and it's ruled by Venus, and it's a feminine sign. These are all different ways that we can break down the signs of the zodiac, and they have different energetic meanings. So, a fixed sign is a sign that comes in the middle of its season. So we've got Taurus is the middle of spring, Leo is the middle of summer. Wow, my brain. Scorpio is the middle of fall, and then Aquarius is the middle of winter. She's an astrologer par excellence.
That was very cute. I literally saw the light go out of your eyes in the middle of that sentence.
Just that's okay.
We're
God
tired.
said you don't need to talk anymore. God said go back to the garden and shut up, Christina.
I love when you're this cranky. I feel like you missed your calling to do self-deprecating stand-up comedy sometimes.
I literally agree with you, and I just think about that a lot. I really like Janine Garofalo. So anyway, in terms of the centrality of the season, I like that the fixed signs are kind of ensconced between their two other signs of their seasonality. And what fixed signs do is they conserve. They're all conservative, not meaning like politically conservative, but they look to conserve their resources so that they can be stable and secure. And so when we're having a garden, we are trying to, yes, grow, but we're also protecting and conserving the abundance that we have walled off within those spaces. So I think it's interesting to just think of this time of year, what it means to really put down roots into the gardens of our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and what are we not really protecting enough or being conservative enough with in terms of our energy and
Mm-hmm.
our vision. I think that that's one of the lessons that Taurus is really interested in showing us, and I think that that's like a very powerful element of the sign that other signs don't necessarily have. Taurus's resources are physical and earthen.
Mm-hmm.
Leo's resource is like the resource of its inner vision and that solar perspective. Scorpio's resource is the resource of the soul. And then
Mm-hmm.
Aquarius's resource is about the kind of communitarian aspects of life. So each of them looks to really cultivate those little garden spaces in the chart.
Yeah.
And so here we are. Yeah.
I think that's really beautiful. And I think I love the perspective of kind of seeing the fixed signs as being like, it's something we see in the tarot often where we have at least in two cards, we see
Hmm.
them replicated in the Wheel of Fortune and in the World card, because them being fixed, it kind of puts this stability on reality. And then we have like in the Wheel of Fortune, we have the wheel constantly spinning, motion never stops. And then we have the fixed signs at the corners saying, and yet also it is
Right.
unchanging. We are
Mm,
stable. And
that's
then
beautiful.
we
Yeah.
see it in the World card as well, where we have these 4 points of reality that are always in existence and very real to us. And then we have the world, which is like this cosmic opening, right?
Mhm.
That's like beyond reality. So we have the tension in both of those cards. And I really like in gardens, we often will have like a lot of times the gardens will be described as having 4 corners.
Mhm.
And like we see that in the as you mentioned before, and we see that in the Eden for sure, of the four
Yeah.
corners of Eden, the 4 walls of Eden.
Ar
Hmm.
aren't so yeah, and I think that I read too that Eden was considered to be, like, at the meeting place of 4 tributary rivers as well?
In the Pamela Smith's tarot, there's 5 streams of water coming out of the Ace of Cups, which are representative of the rivers in the Garden of Eden. But I
Oh,
can't remember if it's because there's 5 rivers in Eden, or if it's because she snuck in an extra one, which is supposed to symbolize some kind of hermetic mystery that we don't know.
that's so cool. I read that there were 4, but I'm
It's
willing
probably
to
it's probably 4, and she snuck in an extra one.
I love that. Good for her.
And and it's like it pops out of nowhere too, and it's just
Mhm.
like you don't even notice it if you're not looking for it. In fact, like
So
I
cool.
wrote a whole meditation about the Ace of Cups and then talked about the 4 streams of water, and then one day I looked at it, I was like,
There are
god
5.
damn, there's 5.
That's so fascinating.
Yep.
I so what I wanted to say though about that was, yeah, there's 5 in the card. I'm looking at it right now.
Hmm.
Um, the 4-ness though, and the image of like the 4 walls of the garden and the tree at the center really brings to mind just the image of a mandala, which is so
Yes.
important
Yeah.
for our friend Carl Jung and also just
Hmm.
like in spiritual traditions around the world. But
Hmm.
that and I want to what do you see in terms of the mandala? I always see it as just like a kind of depiction of soul and the search
Yeah.
for self and its complexities.
Yeah.
I actually think that one of the oldest depictions of the Garden of Eden is in some mosaic thing that's in Ravenna, Italy, and it looks like a mandala, but like
Oh
with
yeah.
lots of little stars in it, and it's
I
really
believe
pretty.
it.
Hmm.
I mean, I think of Hildegard, and I think of her art looking so mandala like as well,
Hmm.
and so abstract. I think the garden, if we're gonna find like a physical representation of what we imagine for a mandala, I can't imagine something better than a garden, because the garden, when we picture it, we picture many colors. It's not just grass, right? We
Right.
picture flowering trees and roses and berries and all sorts of different things and vibrancy and layers, and it's all organized too, which is what makes it a garden. It's not just growing in its natural state, it's cultivation. We place these things in this particular order because it is beautiful that way.
Mhm.
And I think that when we're drawing mandalas, which is something that Jung often recommended for people as part of their just like inner work, is to
Mhm.
draw these things and to express it through some kind of like aesthetic way. Um, we see the same thing of like this organization of color and shape and form and space. And it's a very similar thing to what we see in a garden through
Mm-hmm.
nature, just through
Mm-hmm.
the way nature presents itself.
Yeah. I think the gardens at Versailles are very
Wild.
mandala-like, or they're like patterned, right?
Yeah, they're not very flowery, which is interesting.
Yeah,
They're
it's a lot of
very
like little
labyrinthy.
shrubs. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got the worst sunburn of my entire life at the Garden of Versailles.
There's no coverage. There's like trees
There's
on the
none.
periphery, but you can't really go into them. So yeah, that's really
I
funny.
was I was weeping, and I
Mm.
was like, I might die. I don't know if I'm going to survive this." It was absolutely horrendous, and it was like one of those summers where Paris had like it was 100 degrees every day, and they just had a crazy
Yeah.
heat wave because of
Oh
global
God.
warming. And I thought that was my end. I thought that was the end to me. I was like, if I die at Versailles, it's great.
It's
What better
poetic.
way?
Mhm. We'll take
Yep.
it
I'll take
because we are mentally healthy here at Soror Mystica.
We like pretty things.
And death. Okay.
But yeah, I think that's a very beautiful image of connecting it to the mandala and this layered form that,
Mhm.
and I think, coming back to the idea of soul is a difficult term. I think that when we think about soul, we all know what we're talking about. At the same time, it's there's not one definition for it that we can. In Jungian psychology, soul is like not a term that is used technically. It's used
Mhm.
casually often, but not technically. We might use Jung's archetype of the capital S self, which is what he identified as like the container of the whole psyche that is both personal and cosmic at the same time. And it's one and it's beyond one. And so it's a very mystical kind of idea. But also he thinks of it very like technically, very clinically often, and especially how it relates to the ego. And I think that soul is slightly different, but it's also the same, and it's all kind of mysterious to me, and I haven't totally wrapped my head around it in general. I think that oftentimes we'll be like, there's this idea of the labyrinth, and we're looking for the thing at the center. And I think
Mhm.
there is a thing at the center. We see with the garden, we see it all the time. Every garden has something at the center that's the purest expression, but all the layers of the garden, all the plants and all the things are also part of it. And I like to remember that too, that all the multiple experiences of ourselves are part of soul. And I think James
Mhm.
Hillman might agree with me, or he might really not. I don't know. I actually don't know. um, but I think there's also something that we've touched on is that the soul in the image of the garden is beautiful. Beauty
Mhm.
is important and femininity is important, and I think that takes us a little bit to the idea of the like anima mundi, for
Mhm.
example, of the world soul being a particularly feminine expression of something. And I don't know. I don't really know what to do with all of that yet, but these are things that I think kind of fold in that are
Yeah.
pretty.
They are pretty, and it's also allowed to be a great mystery because we
Hmm.
don't have to know everything about this. But I think that just holding all of these symbols and images together really builds a more like robust and multifaceted picture of the
Yeah.
garden and its symbolism. So
Yeah.
I feel content with
Yeah.
everything that you've just offered.
I think we did great. I think probably we can move on to like a dream now.
Yep. Thanks everyone for listening to Garden Discussion. Let's do a dream.
If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to leave a review or learn more about how you can support us on Mighty Networks, where you can get access to some exciting exclusive offerings. Or you can connect with us by sharing a symbolic experience, whether from a dream or synchronicity, for us to explore on the show. Thank you to today's sharer, and please tell us your symbolic experience or connect with us on our website, sorormysticapodcast.com.
Are you a small business looking to reach a targeted audience of people interested in all things esoteric? If this sounds like you, Soror Mystica would love to invite you to become an ad partner. We offer a highly tailored audience of mindful, curious, depth-seeking listeners, and we would be delighted to showcase your business and offerings to new hearts and new minds.
Simply fill out an advertiser application form at our website, linked in the show notes below, or navigate to sorormysticapodcast.com/advertise with us.
Hello, my lovers of tarot, astrology, and the symbolic. Would you like to go on even deeper dives into topics that are even more niche and specialized and fascinating? Perhaps you'd like to explore angels in the tarot, or beasts in your dreams, or the thresholds of astrology. This is just a sampling of the bonus episodes we have over at our Cloister. So go in the show notes and click the link and join us in even deeper conversations. We really hope to see you there.
So our dreamer writes, and the title of this is Unicorn. I had a dream where I stood by a unicorn's side and hesitantly touched it, stroked its back. I wanted to embrace it, and imagined that I put my cheek on it, but there the dream ended. I don't remember seeing the horn, I just knew that it was a unicorn when I woke up. I interpret it as me not fully acknowledging energies inside me, with the horn being a powerful part of the creature and me taking no notice of it. I still have some understanding. Oh, and I'm searching for understanding about who I am. I'm curious about the lion and the unicorn story together, and the virgin and unicorn story as her belonging to herself, having enough inner security to hold the animal beside her. And for some kind of uh, ephemeral detail or additional detail, our dreamer wrote, before I had the dream, I thought about the fact that I was having trouble balancing fire and water energies inside of me, making reference to pieces of their natal chart and just being
Mm-hmm.
curious about what it is to be in relationship with those two pieces of self. So I think that, yeah, the unicorn question goes beautifully with gardens
It
because
does,
of
because they're
the
in the garden. Often
Yep.
that's the thing at the center of the garden
Yeah.
in like the tapestries. They'll have a garden and they'll have the unicorn at the center.
Mhm. Yeah, so tell me, you're the unicorn girl. Tell me what you
Yeah.
think about this symbol, just to begin with.
I think that unicorns are awesome. Um, I we are gonna do a unicorn episode, and I want to like get a big fat book on unicorns and the history of unicorns. That should be my summer reading. I want that.
Mhm.
Um, the unicorn is an interesting symbol because it's a magical creature, and so when it's a magical creature means that we're talking about the supernatural and we're talking about the divine, and it's beyond the normal kind of experience of whatever the creature is. What I think that this person is referring to is the lady in the unicorn tapestries.
Mhm.
um, because there is, if you haven't seen the lady in the unicorn tapestries, there's five of them. They're connected to each of the five senses, or maybe there's six of them, and then the last one is the soul, I think,
Mhm.
because there's sight, hearing, touch, taste, um,
Smell.
smell. It's like, there's another one there somewhere. And then there's a sense of soul. So I guess there's six of them. And so it's a very, very famous series of tapestries in which there's a woman with a unicorn, and she's engaging with the unicorn, touching it, or in some way relating to it. And she's in a garden and in these tapestries. And there's often a lion there, which is interesting. The
Mhm.
lion and the unicorn were two very potent symbols in the medieval period. Both were symbols of Christ.
Mhm.
Um, the lion was a symbol of Christ's kingship, regality,
Mhm.
um, and the unicorn was the symbol of his woundedness,
Mhm.
and also his purity and the kind of magic of Christ as like a
Mhm.
supernatural being. The unicorn in this tradition is often wounded, often being hunted, and that's on purpose too, because it's like pointing to like the vulnerability of Christ and representing like the way that he was hunted and crucified and
Mhm.
etc. But in this particular series of images that this dream is relating to or kind of replicating, it's not wounded, it's whole, it's healed, and it feels very magical. um, I would say that we have definitely a theme that we've talked about, the theme of the virgin, the self-sovereign woman. our side of ourselves that's not necessarily in relationship with other things. It's about our own development. And then we also have the unicorn representing this kind of holy being that is untouchable, it's magical and beyond us, and also we're like drawn to it. So it definitely has that essence of being a symbol of the soul. I find it interesting. You know the horn is there when you wake up. You know it, so it obviously
Mhm.
was that. But then you don't see it. There's something about that you can't see. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that when I think of the horn, I think of like being able to defend oneself for whatever
Mhm.
reason. It's kind of like a weapon, but it's also what makes the unicorn not a horse. And so it's this kind
Yeah.
of uniqueness quality as well for this particular mythical beast. And it's what makes it, yeah, like sacred. And I think that the horn extending from like the, third eye
Yeah.
essentially position of the creature is really important too. It says something about the connection to that inner sight. So if this dreamer is, wanting to embrace the unicorn, realizing that maybe the unicorn doesn't have all of its requisite parts, there's this desire to convene with something that is like maybe divine or holy or beautiful within.
Hmm.
But there's still this question of like where's our intuition, where's our third sight almost. That's kind
Hmm.
of what I feel about this dream. And I think it's an important dream probably for this
Yeah.
person. It feels very pure.
It
Hmm.
does, and I think the fact that they can't quite touch it is not a problem. It's interesting and it's something to notice, but I don't of course you can't touch it.
Hmm.
The fact that it showed up is significant enough, but you're not able to yet, like, make contact with it. I'm not surprised. So don't
Hmm.
fret over that. I don't think that it's saying any, like, scary thing, like, you don't have access to this thing.
Yeah.
I think that when we have these numinous symbols, meaning numinous being like divine, basically symbols, we're not going to be in possession of it. We're not going to be able to grab onto it, right? So it's okay that we just witness it and we want to reach out but don't quite make contact. I think the goal is to make the contact. That's what you're reaching
Hmm.
for. So there's it. The dream feels to me preparatory. It's kind of
Mm.
like we have like a prefiguration of the numinous experience here. We're going to try to approach it. There's also
Mhm.
an inability to see the symbol of its numinosity, right? To see the horn, the thing that makes it the magical being. You can't quite see that clearly yet either. Also, not that surprising to me because it feels like it's just entered the frame.
Mhm.
Um, but I think something that's interesting is the feeling that you don't fully express your emotions, and the feeling that there's some kind of sense of not balancing water and fire in you. Basically, it sounds like what you're expressing is a lack of feeling integrated, lack
Mhm.
of feeling like there's this access to wholeness and ability to be fully present in your emotional state and in your self expression. Um, and that's curious to me that you've associated that with this dream and
Mhm.
this sort of numinous image of the unicorn.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. It's like we often know not the answer, but we often know the important question that we're asking, and our dreams will show us that question in image form or in
Yeah.
emotion form or whatever, symbolic form. And so, if you're already working with the idea that there's this kind of disintegration of pieces of self, and then you have a dream of a disintegrated unicorn, I think that that can also be a symbol of yourself and your expression at this moment in time. And so, what if you did some active imagination around asking that unicorn, where is its horn? What's going on here?
Yeah.
Or even imagining yourself kind of being present with a unicorn that like creates a horn for itself and seeing how that feels for you. I think that this is one of those places where working with the symbol actively can bring in a little bit of integration psychically for the dreamer.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. I think look at those tapestries. Like,
Yes,
sit with
definitely.
them.
Hmm.
Go to France. No, I do highly recommend seeing them. I was just telling Christina I've had the, like, absolute pleasure of seeing them several times now, and, it is an experience that is like no other, and they're enormous and they're exquisite, so if ever one day in your life you get to go to Paris and look at those, definitely do that. But pull them up online, print them out or something, order some nice prints of them. They're everywhere. And look at all of them, not just like the one with the soul. I think that the idea with the senses is that it kind of shows us how we marry our humanity with this divinity. There's the integration of these things, and I think it's really, really pretty. But sit with that image and let it feel the image rather than trying to intellectualize your way through it. What does it inspire in you? What does it connect to in you? What emotion does it bring up in you? If you're feeling a difficult time connecting to emotion, see if those images can inspire that emotion. And I love that idea that Christina had, bringing it into active imagination and trying to meet that unicorn there and become that princess in the garden, that virgin in the garden, petting her pet unicorn. I wish I dreamed of unicorns instead of Home Alone meets Die Hard.
One day.
One day.
Oh, you're funny. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And I hope that this has been an interesting, exploration of this symbol. So thank you to our dreamer as well.
Yep. So we hope to see you at our book club, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us in our conversation today.
Please consider supporting the podcast by leaving a review and following Soror Mystica wherever you listen.
You can also become a more active supporter and a member of the Soror Mystica community by joining us on our Mighty Networks platform.
If you have a symbolic experience that you'd like to share with us for the podcast, you can tell us all about it at sorormysticapodcast.com.
The music for this podcast is written and performed by me, Mariana Lewis, with special thanks to Stefan Lewis. You can connect with both Christina and myself on Instagram and get to know our work by clicking on the links in the show notes.
As the alchemical motto goes, as above, so below, as within, so without.
May this ancient wisdom continue to guide you deeper.
Until next time, take good care.